So just recapping on the body structure ideas. So starting with your feet, just engage with the feet, and you can change position so you can be in any stance and just try and feel the connection with the front of the feet. So you feel a little bit of rocking, or as if you're about to lose your balance, just get to that tipping point. So you can be in the parallel stance, in the V stance, horse stance, single leg, or in the full stance, like the bow stance. So just beginning with the ground connection. So it's that balance point which takes you forward, or you can think of the spring up from the feet. So in any position, balancing or springing. And as you do that, the legs will naturally engage. So you try and get from the foot through the legs. So you're relaxing the joints, allowing the joints to be springy, not locking the knees, not locking the hips. So that generally sorts out the alignment of the legs. We don't need to think too much about holding the knee. In fact, probably don't think about that at all, but just notice if you go out of alignment rather than try and hold in alignment. So by engaging both feet and equally springy, balancing in both fronts of both feet. So having the idea that that's your foot, the heel is like the hind leg. So you start from the feet, the fronts of the feet. You can imagine the arch of the foot engaging, but just find the front of your foot. The next point of awareness can be the qua, so the sitting area, so the folding in the hips, and also balancing that with the tail at the back. So you've got this kind of plumb line. When you start to do that, then also engage through the crown of the head, so you're not just pushing around the hips. So feel like from pressing up, you're swinging and releasing the plumb line. And this is the top of the plumb line coming up. So you still got the front of the feet and the legs. Now the qua, the tail. And here we're talking about the sort of physical structure. Later we'll work with things like the space between the legs, or like you're standing in a river. So there's other ideas that we'll start to add in. But just in terms of the physical body, so the next part you could think of is the abdomen. So you try and lengthen between the pelvis and the rib cage, just stretching slightly. And again, through the crown of the head, still got the legs engaged. Plumb line. And with the plumb line and the tailbone, above the tailbone, be aware of the lumbar spine. So when you stretch up the front, you might feel the lumbar curve accentuates. So try and balance that by expanding the other way slightly. So what we call the Mingmen in Chinese, you open around the Mingmen or behind the navel, just gently pressing backwards or expanding from behind the abdomen, stretching up at the front. When we get to the ribs, again, with the stretching up, try not to push the ribs out, so relax the ribs. Think of opening the side ribs and the back. So this kind of girdle around here, sideways and backwards, open, and that connects to this behind the lumbar spine. When we think of the chest and the shoulders, just a kind of neutral open feeling. So neither pushing out or hunching backwards, just a neutral sort of, imagine a ball or something, or your heart chakra, if you want to think about that, just like there's something that's open and even. So the shoulders are not forward or back, they're just kind of neutral, but generally open. Not open like this, not collapsing like that. Structurally, you can then think of the collarbones and just feel the shoulders are like wings floating a little bit. So just be aware of the collarbones coming out of the sternum. So just kind of floating the shoulders, shoulder blades just relaxing behind you, so they're neither pulled down or pushed out or anything, just relaxed, floating. In Tai Chi, we'll talk about the elbow being heavy, the shoulder sinking. So just be aware that the elbow doesn't lift your shoulder. So that if the shoulder's like a boat floating, the elbow's like the anchor underneath the boat. But it's not submerging and pulling it down, it's just kind of floating with an anchor. With the hands, you just feel the sense of touch through each fingertip. Or the palm, you can imagine holding the ball. We'll work on that stuff in a future class, but just engage the hands through the sense of touch. Then we're coming up from the behind the shoulders up through the back of the spine. So you can be aware of this point here and just think of lengthening or pressing out behind you slightly. So that's kind of elongating the cervical spine. And we're also opening the lumbar spine slightly. Then pressing up through to the crown. In the martial art aspect, they'll say to keep the chin in, or you can imagine opening the back of the neck. But again, not forcing either pulling in or pushing out the chin. Find a kind of neutral feeling. So that's the structural points in terms of the physical body engagements from the feet to the crown of the head. So we covered that in the previous class. That's just to remind you of those and try to practice them in any position. Okay, so in the second of the beginners classes, we looked at opening, so stretching. So you have the feeling of outward, open, stretch, expand. Tonight we're going to look at the opposite direction, which is to come in. So like pulling inwards or integration from the hands and the feet through the head, sort of coming in towards the spine, gathering inwards. So in Tai Chi, you can relate this to the concept of opening and closing. So the stretching is the opening, this is closing. It's called Kai He or something in Chinese, opening, closing. In the Scaravelli yoga, they sometimes call it like gathering inwards, so bringing things back into the spine. So you'd see that sort of strange looking posture in some of those teachers, and they'll do things like that, feeling everything come in. So if we're thinking about the spine, sometimes use this to demonstrate. So that if I'm opening, that's that direction. Closing is like bringing the snake back together. So that could be, think of that as your spine. But that just a kind of metaphor for the body. Stretching, open, and then reintegrating, which creates a sort of release in the snake. This is a bit tense, so you're releasing by integration. Another way you can visualize that idea is like a knot. So if I'm stretching the knot, it makes it tighter. If I push the knot back into itself, it can release the knot. So when we close, you might think that's closed, but if you look at my hands, they're sort of opening. So this closing can also create a sense of release in the joints by bringing the body back together and reintegrating the structure. Another way you can visualize it, just with these little visual aids. So that could be opening, everything goes loose and separates. Closing, everything pulls together and reintegrates. That's like the song or the release. Hopefully you don't walk around like that. But when I do this, it pulls all the bits of wood together and creates a connection. So that's another way you can think of closing. So how do you actually do it in your own practice? That's what we're looking at. So on one level, if you just take your hand, is pulling inwards would be a sort of closing action. So in simple, like the beginning of the Tai Chi form, you have this and this. So you'd say that's open, this is closed. Or sideways, open, close. So you could copy that just as a shape, which doesn't really create the integration. It's more just bending your elbow. So to begin to create the integration, I feel like sort of pulling inwards rather than just bending the elbow. And looking for a kind of elastic or stretchy feeling on the in and the out. One teacher imagines like springs attached to his fingers, and you're pulling, like the springs are attached to the wall, and you're pulling and stretching the springs. Or you can imagine an elastic band, you're pulling it to create this stretching in. So it's relatively easy to start to feel that in the arm. Structurally, you can also think of the structure of the shoulders. If I show you in a little skeleton thing. So coming through the collarbones into the sternum, or coming through the shoulder girdle, through the shoulder joint. So when I pull in, it's like I'm feeling this area integrate. If you imagine, sometimes you see birds, they'll rest their wings in like that. So you might feel, if you try kind of gathering the shoulders in, then opening them out, you might start to feel beyond your elbow into the shoulder. It's not to pull them up and tense them, but just feel like there's a kind of gathering inwards, like an accordion or something, or expanding outwards. And again, these are just sort of ideas, not necessarily physical actions, just to give you a sense of something that goes beyond just bending your arm. So letting the shoulder reintegrate, like the ball and socket joint pulls back in. And then I want to do the same in the legs. So it's harder to do that when you're standing. It can be hard to even visualize it. Okay, so the arms pulling in, this would be that in direction, this is out. It could be here, could be sideways, in and out. Now with the legs, it's easier to feel that when the feet aren't on the ground. So the pulling in, say it's one leg, I pull the leg in, or I can pull the leg in this way. So if I imagine, or even if you have someone at home that could help you explore this, if they were holding your leg and you feel it sort of pull in towards your center, the same way the arm, if you try maybe with the opposite arm, the arm pulls in through the shoulder into your spine, into the center here in the leg. So there's a kind of matching cross body thing you could feel here. Opening out, pulling in. If I try that on the other side, that's open, closing, opening, closing. So that gives you the pattern. So we're looking for this as a movement pattern in towards the center. And in a sense, I'm going to include the head in that. So the head is also integrated into the spine. Okay, so if you could try that lying down, you'll get the pattern of all four limbs. And one of the Wu style masters was meant to have said 4 into 1. So the four limbs become one in the center of your body, or in the dantian or whatever. But just get the feeling everything draws in. When I'm standing and the feet draw in, it's going to make me bend my legs. Or I could stand on one leg and do this, but it's a bit artificial. So this feeling of pulling in creates a lowering of the body. But you're trying to differentiate that from just dropping your weight. So it's like I'm pulling myself from the feet. This inward action is pulling me towards the ground. The same way as this action could pull me off the ground. The feet can pull me towards the ground. Find the front of your feet. The hands, if I'm pulling myself up, can pull me up. So you've got this closing inward direction. So just different ways to explain it. Pushing out, pulling in can be one set of words. And remember, the words are limited. So they're just to give you a sort of clues towards what you're doing. So push out, pull in, and use the hands and the feet. Push out. Expand the joints, so create space opening, then integrate the bones, like the donkey pulling the bits of wood together, then stretching out the spaces between the wood. Pull in, include the spine like the snake, and then expand out. So again, Tai Chi might call that opening and closing. One teacher calls it electric magnetic. So electric's like the Emperor from Star Wars. Magnetic's like Magneto from the X-Men. So everything pulls in or everything goes out. So it's expansion, integration. When we're thinking about the body structure, the internal structure, this has a relationship to things like the arches of the feet, the diaphragm, or the pelvic floor. So engaging the arch of the foot and the pelvic floor and the diaphragm gives me a feeling of that pulling. There's a sort of taut, elastic, stretchy feeling. The upper body, you could think of it as the hands, it's the armpit, the shoulder girdle, crown of the head engaging. So this integration of the upper limbs and the lower limbs. Then the opening and expansion of those areas as well. The expansion might be more shoulder joint, elbow joint, wrist joint, the spine opening, that feeling of space, then the feeling of integration, arches of the feet, diaphragms, shoulder girdle. You could think of the palms of the hands like the arches of the feet. So you just have to try and engage with this somehow. It's subtle and it's not visually obvious to follow. You might see it subtly, but not too obviously. So you have to kind of play with it. So in a later class, we're going to talk about 6 directions, balancing vertical, horizontal. And there is a connection to the opening and closing in that. So we'll revisit it there. Also with an idea of sort of containing inwards, expanding outwards. But for this class, it was more about the pulling inwards, integration, then expand outwards. If I was looking at that in the Tai Chi form, just as an example, it might change the way the form looks. So the beginning posture, I might do something like this, like pull myself towards the ground, push out of the ground and expand the arms out. Then I would pull from the feet, pull from the arms, pulling everything inwards. It's not necessarily the way the form should be done, but it's just a way to explore this concept, pulling in. As I push down, I'll push the feet away. So it's like the hands and the feet are being pushed out. So you could just explore that again. So I start by pulling the feet and pull myself towards the ground. I could pull my hands in somehow as well, like just feel a pulling in the hands. So you can imagine this as reversing a polarity like suction or expulsion. So sucking in, then I'm expanding out. So the polarity changes to out through the legs, out through the arms, out through the crown of the head. Now I change it to in again. So pull in from the arms, pull myself towards the ground. Then as I push the hands down, I push through the legs, open joints. So it just gives you a relationship to the Tai Chi form. You could explore that more through the form. So I could, if I was moving on to the grasp the bird's tail section, again, it's kind of subtle and a bit complicated. So it might be like I'm pulling myself into the center here. This is pulling or closing. Then this could be opening and pushing everything out. Here I might pull myself into the front leg, maybe slightly push again to stabilize. It's kind of subtle at that point. Again, pull into the center of the stance, gather in. Again, not to say this is how you should do Tai Chi, it's just to explore this concept. Gathered, it might start to expand out here. So this is opening. Closing, so pulling the leg, pulling the arms. I can either stay closed, but here I want to actually press into the foot slightly so I open to find my 100%. To step, I bend the leg, but I could feel that as a pull. So I'm pulling and sitting into the stance, I can feel as a pulling together, pulling into the center. I might continue that as I turn and then expand out. So I open now. So everything's now opening. Both legs, both hands, expanding. Things like rollback are a bit complex. So it might be that I'm pulling from the back leg, pulling in, just as an exploration. Then I might open out here. Then pull back into the center. Pull, 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 hands and feet. Pulling into the press. Then outwards. Opening. So that's just giving you a vehicle for exploring that. It could be, you could take another posture. It could be like brush knee into a step. So here I might be pulling in, opening out. Maybe pulling in, releasing out. So anytime you're coming towards the center, you could have a feeling of pulling and then pushing. We could try it also just in a single form. Pull in, push out. Pull feet, pull hands. Open out from your center. Gather into your center. So we'll practice another set of standing practice. We'll add another minute, so we'll do 2 minutes in each posture. So in terms of the internal practices or external practices, you've got the points of structure that we covered, and you've got opening and closing. So you can try and explore those. Okay, so the postures are going to just be parallel stance, the V stance or horse stance, single leg stances, and then the bow stance, left and right. And then we'll come back to kind of Wuji practice or standing meditation type practice to finish. So just begin in the parallel stance. And remember that you can explore the hand positions as you feel free to do, like maybe symmetrical positions, or you could take shapes from the form and explore those. But we're looking for sort of whole body structural balance at the moment. So just beginning the timer there. And again, the emphasis here is to allow movement, allow engagement, to try and train the nervous system and the body to create these connections and relationships, patterns. So the first connection is the foot, and the pattern is this kind of zigzag in the legs through to the crown of the head. you've got the engagement of the crown and the plumb line, Ming Men, ribs, upper body, the sort of anchoring of the elbow, floating of the shoulder slightly, opening the back. And then you might start to explore opening and closing, so just opening the joints, or then pulling inwards. One teacher called this shrinking the bones, so pulling, like shrink wrapping or something, pulling inwards, then opening outwards. When you pull in, you're trying to sort of refine the integration, integrity of the structure into the spine. When you open, you're just creating more space, more pung or more expanded, three-dimensional. One aspect of opening and closing, we'll maybe touch on it later, is the potential to rotate and spiral slightly. That's sometimes referred to as opening and closing, but for now I'm looking more at the pull in, push out aspect. Okay, so we can change into the V stance. And once again, go through the points of the structure if you wish. So find the feet, find the plumb line, find the crown, open the back. And because this is a kind of vertical emphasis posture, I could try and feel the upward pull that stretches me up, and then this downward pull that stretches me down, and the balance of up and down from this kind of stretchy vertical thing. Or I can just expand everything out, so that's me opening everything. The stretching feels a bit more like the closing in the legs, and a counter stretch up. Then I can just try to feel open, expand. So maybe notice when I pull from the feet, that pulling can open the lumbar spine slightly. So as I pull myself towards the ground, allow that pulling to connect to open the back. Here we can step out, if you wish, into the horse type stance. And again, you can explore opening and closing. So pulling in, expanding out. Pull from the feet, pull from the hands. Open, push out. We went a bit longer on that one, so start again. If we move into single leg practice. So if you want to revise the points of structure, it's the foot, the plumb line, open the back, feel the wings, feel the back of the neck. But then you can kind of bring it to life with this expanding, pulling inwards, opening outwards. You could pull up, pull from underneath to balance the vertical. We'll introduce some other ideas next week about 6 directions, horizontal, vertical, counter, balancing, things like that. But here, just again, go for the integration and expansion. Try and find your center in the spine or in the abdomen. Integration through the shoulder joint, through the hip joint, through the pelvis, through the spine to the crown of the head. An expansion in all directions, but particularly in the joints. Hands and feet, not just the hands. The inward direction, you could think of the bones. The outward direction, you can maybe think of the skin and the surrounding space. Pull into the bones, expand out around the skin and the space, like you're in water. Try the other leg. Again, you can change posture, so you can try a few different shapes if you like, but you might just want to stay in one position and focus on this opening, closing. Gathering in. Integrating the bones, integrating the joints. Engaging through the center. As Vanda Scaravelli said, awakening the spine, but it's kind of like releasing the spine, taking all the conflict and pulling out the spine by integrating, gathering inwards. From the hands and the feet, from the head, from the abdomen, from the left, from the right, into the center, from front and back into the center. Then that release of holding allows you to release out again. Just find space, open out. And you can find a kind of rhythm between in and out. Ensure that you're still equally engaging from the foot through the hips as much as the arms. So you can focus on that completely. You could take the hands down and focus completely on the leg. One teacher calls this pairing the foot and the hip. So you're like bringing the foot and the hip closer to each other, but for me, it's through the hip right into the center. Okay, so then we'll change legs and stand in the full stance or the bow stance. Again, maybe just engage the points of structure, so the kind of tipping point, the jumping point, crown, qua, so no tucking under, sit in the hips, drop the tail, open mingmen, open lumbar spine, open the ribs. Don't push the belly out, don't push the chest out. More like a turtle, cobra, kind of horse or the cat legs, the wings like the crane with the anchoring in the elbows. Then start to gather inwards and expand outwards. So electric, magnetic, if you like, sucking inwards, blowing outwards. Pushing and pulling from all directions, all four limbs. Kind of pushing out through the head as well. It's hard to pull the head in. You don't want to do anything weird with the neck, but it's more like the weight of the moon on the head. That idea of the moon on the head is bringing the head in. Then you can push against the moon. You can pull in and press out. Pull in, press out. You can practice what you might call load and release from Tai Chi. So you load, pull in, like pull the bow, and then release the arrow, push out, pull in, push out. We can change legs. Again, just start with your structure, go through the points from the feet to the head, open back. Remember, to that point behind the head, you can press lightly backwards to create the kind of cobra effect up through the crown. Then explore the in and the out. And today we're focusing a lot on the in, so it's this internal structure, stretching through the body, pulling up the pelvic floor, bringing the legs in. Like, it can be helpful to do this actually, to pull the thighs as if you're pulling the thighs into the hip joint. Use the hands to sort of pull up here, connect the head, feel the shoulder joint, pull in or rest inwards, then expand and open out again. Again, go for the legs. So the legs are the hardest part to figure out sometimes, especially when you're standing on them. So integrate pelvic floor up through this lower spine. You can integrate this way by sort of pulling up the core or drawing the arms in. The kind of weird Scaravelli thing is, looks like you're lifting the shoulders, but you're just kind of drawing the wings in, taking the weight of the arms off, so they're hanging and drawing out, pull back in. But use the fingers maybe to do that as well. Pull in, open out. Then we'll come back to just a sort of standing meditation for a moment. So just relax. There may be an element of the breath to connect to this practice. So as I'm pulling in, the exhale might be the one that particularly gives you the full sense of integration. But just notice as you're pulling inwards, be conscious of the breath and see if the exhale just maybe draws things together a bit more. So as I exhale, engage the arch of the foot, pelvic floor, the stretch of the abdomen, the gathering of the shoulders, the integration of the spine. So I'm just gently pulling myself together. Is that phrase, pull yourself together? It's literally what we're doing. So like the donkey, all the strings are pulling together. And you're not trying to align yourself or hold yourself upright. It's like by pulling together, it creates the alignment. You might then go through the points of alignment, see how they relate to that. Okay, so then the idea of Wuji is a balance of yin and yang, so the in and the out. So you can just take a moment to stop doing either of those things and just feel, imagine maybe that they've come into harmony, or you just very lightly pull in, just very lightly expand out, but almost without any movement. So you could just do it with the mind open out or mind pull in. And then we'll slowly come out of that.